So I saw a recent prophecy from a well-known prophet that contained information about Eli. Eli was a priest in the Bible. Many of you probably already know the story of Eli, starting with Hannah and then with her son Samuel. But anyway, this prophet stated that Eli's bloodline basically ended with his sons Hophni and Phinehas's bloodline. So I'm not going to mention any names and I'm not going to give a gender of this person. But us who study the Bible know that the information that this person put out is not factual. This person is a prophet of the Lord, so I will not deny that. But on a few occasions, I have noticed some information that was given out from the Bible that was inaccurate. And this was a big one here. All this proves is that you must study the Bible for yourself, period. Study the Bible for yourself. Even after this presentation, study for yourself. So I took a screenshot of the transcript from the prophecy. So this is the part of the prophecy that I want to address. This part of the prophecy shows incorrect, inaccurate information. There's a couple of pieces that I want to go over. The first part that I'm going to go over is within the first paragraph. So it says, a little boy is telling you that you will not continue, and that God, in fact, says that your only two sons will be killed. So the little boy that is being discussed is Samuel. When Samuel prophesied to Eli, Samuel just repeated what was already told to Eli by another prophet. But Yah came to Samuel, and Samuel went in and told Eli what the Lord told him. So basically, Eli already knew. So where it says Eli was receiving not just a death sentence, Eli was receiving something that is very painful to hear, which is that you will be eradicated. Basically saying the whole bloodline of Eli will be erased from the face of the earth. And in the second part, it says they didn't have wives because they were guilty of fornicating. Can you believe it? In a priest's robe. Okay, so that's another part that's inaccurate. So we're going to address this situation right now in 1 Samuel, starting with chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 12 through 17 is what we're going to start with. And this is about Eli's wicked sons. It says Eli's sons were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord. Now it was the practice of the priest that whenever any of the people offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come with a three-pronged fork in his hand while the meat was being boiled, and would plunge the fork into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. Whatever the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is how they treated all the Israelites who came to Shiloh. But even before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the person who was sacrificing, "Give the priest some meat to roast. He won't accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." Verse 16, if the person said to him, "Let the fat be burned first, and then take whatever you want," the servant would say, "No, hand it over now. If you don't, I'll take it by force." So you see how wicked Eli's sons were. They were so wicked, they had their servants acting wicked. And 17, the sin of the young men was very great in the Lord's sight, for they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. So all the Israelites were coming to sacrifice to the Adonai, Yahuwah. And these wicked men, Eli's sons and their servants were tainting the offering. They were taking raw meat, eating raw meat. Now, you know that's demonic, right? You know that's demonic. And then if the Israelites that were there sacrificing refused, they would take it by force. Now, here's a plot twist. And I'll put the link to my video about Hannah in the description. This was one of the videos from the Direct Line series. So the plot twist is coming up in the next chapter, but Samuel is the plot twist. So we know that he, meanwhile, was ministering before the Lord, a little boy ministering before the Lord, while these scoundrels were out here taking advantage of people. Samuel was training up to be the Lord's true servant and take the place of those scoundrels. One person taking the place of those two scoundrels. So let's go down to verse 22. It says, "Now Eli was very old, heard about everything his sons were doing to all of Israel, and how they slept with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of the meeting. So he said to them, 'Why do you do such things? I hear from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. No, my sons, the report I hear spreading among the Lord's people is not good. If one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender. But if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them?' His sons, however, did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death." Now, Yah was sick and tired of them. So no matter what Eli would have said at this point, it would not have helped them. They were done. The fact is, Eli should have rebuked and removed them prior to this. He let stuff slide all this time. He heard reports, but he wasn't paying attention to what was going on. You are supposed to be like over them. You just let them run amok. If you hear reports, you should remove them. Whether you do what you're supposed to do or not, if God wants to use you, he will. So we see in verse 26, "And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with the people." So Eli was training up Samuel. Yah God already had his plan in place, and he was using Eli to get it done. Prophecy against the house of Eli. So verse 27, "Now a man of God," so a prophet, "came to Eli and said to him, 'This is what the Lord says. Did I not clearly reveal myself to your ancestors' family when they were in Egypt under Pharaoh?'" So he's talking about the Levites, and the family that he's referring to are Aaron's descendants. So Aaron's descendants are the priests of the Levites. So the Levites have other descendants that do other things in the house of the Lord, but specifically Aaron's descendants are the priests. They are the priestly line chosen by Yah. 28 says, "I chose your ancestor out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod in my presence. I also gave your ancestors' family all the food offerings presented by the Israelites. Why do you scorn my sacrifice and offering that I prescribed for my dwelling? Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people Israel?" So this goes back to what I said before. Eli was letting his sons get away with stuff. He wasn't checking that. He should have rebuked and removed them from the giddy up. But he was letting them run amok and do whatever. And the reason why he was doing it, it seems, because it was benefiting him also, because of what it says here in verse 29. "You honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves," meaning him and his sons, They all were probably fat. We know Eli was. Coming up, you'll see. So they were probably fat as well. This is why Yah said what he said. No matter what Eli tried to do now, no matter how he tried to fix it up now, his household was doomed. All they cared about was theyself and fattening themselves up. It's obvious. Because he was reaping the benefits from what his son was doing, that's why he did not rebuke them until it was too late. And Yah had already made up his mind. Verse 30, therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that members of your family would minister before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me, I will honor. But those who despise me will be disdained. The time is coming when I will cut short your strength and the strength of your priestly house, so that no one in it will reach old age. And you will see distress in my dwelling. Although good will be done to Israel, no one in your family line will ever reach old age. So the whole priestly line from Eli's bloodline has been cursed. Now Aaron had 2 sons that survived. So that doesn't mean the whole priestly line. It just means Eli's line. Let's not forget that. Now this is the second curse that Aaron's household had, because 2 of Aaron's sons were killed because they gave an incorrect sacrifice to Yah. So now we have the descendants of Aaron all the way down, and that's from his son Eleazar is where Eli comes from. Every one of you that I do not cut off from serving at my altar, I will spare only to destroy your sight and sap your strength, and all your descendants will die in the prime of life. So this right here is telling us that Yah put a curse on their bloodline. He didn't completely destroy the bloodline. He put a curse on the bloodline. And that's why I had to address this, because saying that his bloodline was completely destroyed after his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, is an inaccuracy that must be addressed. Now I want to go back to that prophecy transcript. Keep in mind, we just read that Yah shortened the days of Eli's house of priests. But here it says Eli was receiving not just a death sentence for him and his sons, but he would also be eradicated from the face of the earth. Meaning what? Eradicated means ended, right? Let's look at the definition of eradicated. So I pressed on the word and got the Siri dictionary. Eradicated, it says of a tree or plant depicted with the roots exposed. So then I pulled up the definition from the Webster Merriam Dictionary, and it says to do away with as completely as if by pulling up by the roots, which means to completely eliminate. That's basically what it means, to eliminate. So we know that that was the first thing that was incorrect from this prophecy. Yah did not eradicate Eli and his household. He did not eradicate Aaron's bloodline. He only put a curse on it by shortening the lifespan of all the priests in the bloodline. So what does that mean? That means there were others in the bloodline. Now back to 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 34, it says, and what happens to your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, will be assigned to you. They will both die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and mind. I will firmly establish his priestly house, and they will minister before my anointed one always. So who is he talking about here? He already cursed the bloodline of the priests here, starting with Eli. Then everyone left in your family line will come and bow down before him for a piece of silver and a loaf of bread and plead, appoint me to some priestly office so I can have food to eat. So his bloodline will no longer be naturally put in place, but has to be appointed and has to beg somebody to be appointed because of the sins of him and his sons. Now we're about to find out who Yah is raising up to be his priest. It says, the Lord calls Samuel. This is chapter 3. 1 Samuel chapter 3. So it says, the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. So Yah used Eli to raise up Samuel to be the priest he wanted him to be. Yah will use you even if you don't do right. If he wants to use you, he will use you in a way that he wants. More information that Yah was probably talking about Samuel here. If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 18 through 21, you'll see that it says Samuel was ministering before the Lord. He wore an ephod. An ephod was worn by priests. And it says each year his mother made him a little robe and took it to him when she went up with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. And it goes on to say in verse 20, Eli the priest went on to bless Samuel's father and his mother, saying, may the Lord give you other children, because she sacrificed her son. This is Hannah. She sacrificed her son and gave him to Yah. So Yah raised him up as his own personal priest. And in verse 21, you see, because of her sacrifice, she was blessed with 3 other sons and 2 daughters. And Samuel grew up in the presence of Yah, period. Who did Yah appoint to be priests? The Levites from Aaron's bloodline and Samuel. Samuel was a priest and a prophet. He anointed 2 kings, Saul and David. Let's continue. So if we go back to 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30, it kind of tells us, gives us the information again. It says, therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I promised that your branch of the tribe of Levi would always be my priest, but I will honor those who honor me, and I will despise those who think lightly of me. So even though he put that curse on there, he did not remove the promise. Now back to chapter 3, verse 2, it says, one night Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Verse 7, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Samuel thought it was Eli calling him because he did not know the Lord's call yet. So it took 3 times before Eli caught the revelation that Yah was trying to get a hold of Samuel. And you see down in verse 8, a 3rd time the Lord said, Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. That's when he finally caught the revelation. If we go back up to verse 1, at the end of it, it says, in those days the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. So now we see that this is about to change. And Yah is about to use Samuel for a prophet and a priest. Verse 9, so Eli told Samuel, go and lie down. And if the Lord calls you again, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lied down just like he was told to do. Now in verse 10, watch this. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. The same way he did the other 3 times, but now Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening, because Eli finally caught the revelation and knew what was going on. And the Lord said to Samuel, see, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. At that time, I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family from beginning to end. So everything that was already told to the prophet, to Eli, was about to be carried out. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. You see? He knew his sons was doing this stuff. He knew they were wicked and he let that stuff slide. Like I said earlier, because it was benefiting him, he did not do anything. This type of stuff happens to this day in churches. For example, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church knows good and well what Yeshua and everybody from the Bible looks like. But what kind of statues do they put out there? You go to the Catholic Church, what kind of statues do you see? And who do they worship? They know good and well. And then you go behind the scenes, there's videos out there. Who are they worshiping? Behind closed doors, they're worshiping a swarthy Yeshua. In front, they're worshiping a pale Mary. If they were to tell the truth about who Yeshua really was, they would lose all their stuff. And they don't want to lose all their stuff. They don't want to lose their power. They don't want to lose their strength. They don't want to lose their money, their influence. So they keep up a false pretense and go behind closed doors thinking that that's going to help them, worshiping a swarthy Yeshua behind closed doors and thinking nobody knows that they're doing it. But Yah sees everything. And Yah goes on to say his sons blasphemed against him, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. And Samuel lay down until morning, then opened the doors of the house of the Lord. He was afraid to tell Eli the vision, even though Yah said that Eli already knew. Samuel was still afraid to tell him the vision that he saw. But Eli called him and said, Samuel, my son. Samuel answered, here I am. What was it he said to you? Eli asked. Do not hide it from me. May God deal with you but ever so severely if you hide anything he told you from me. So Samuel told him everything. He didn't want to be dealt with severely by Yah. He hid nothing from him. And then Eli said, he is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes. So Eli had already accepted his fate of what was going to happen. Now back to the prophecy transcript. It says, there's no more line of Eli. If the houses, the father's houses, are standing one day before the Lord, can you imagine Eli will be standing there with his two sons for judgment? And you will not see a line of modern people with cell phones standing there too. His line did not continue. So this information has already been debunked, that the bloodline did not end at Hophni and Phinehas. And then if we go down a little bit more, that is a hefty prophecy. That is a very heavy death prophecy to receive from a little boy, and he did not deny it at all. He wasn't speaking in resignation. So now this prophet is talking about Eli, that he did not deny what Yah was saying about him. But the truth of the matter is he did have time to process it because he was already told by the prophet of Yah prior to Samuel being a witness and telling him once again. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 1 through 9, we see where the Philistines have taken the Ark of the Covenant, and they've taken Hophni and Phinehas, and they ended up killing Hophni and Phinehas. In chapter 10, we see the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 1,000 foot soldiers. Wow. And the ark of the God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, had died. Just like the prophet of the Lord said, just like Samuel was a witness, and he prophesied and told Eli as well. Both of Eli's sons died at the same time. So then we go down to verse 12. So it says, the death of Eli. That same day, a Benjamite ran from the battle line and went to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he arrived, there was Eli sitting on his chair by the side of the road, watching, because his heart feared for the ark of the God. When the man entered the town and told what had happened, the whole town sent up a cry. Eli heard the outcry and asked, "What is the meaning of this uproar?" The man hurried over to Eli, who was 98 years old and whose eyes had failed so that he could not see. Now, let me explain for anybody that thinks the same way that I think. You're wondering the same thing that I'm wondering, right? Because this is a contradiction to what was said in verse 13. It says he was sitting by the road watching. But how can he watch if he is blind, right? For this, it's all about what is translated and how it's worded. So in the NIV, in the KJV, and a couple of other ones, it says he was watching. But if you go to the NLT, as you see here, it says that he was waiting. Also, the 1599 Geneva Bible says the same thing. It says he was waiting. It says Eli sat upon a seat by the wayside waiting. NLT and NIV are similar, but I've noticed that the NLT is more similar to the Geneva Bible as far as the context and the understanding and the accuracy. Now back to chapter 4, verse 19. He told Eli, "I have just come from the battle line. I fled from it this very day." Eli asked, What happened, my son?" The man who brought the news replied, "Israel fled before the Philistines, and the army has suffered heavy losses. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." Not to be petty, but let's go back to that incorrect prophecy transcript. And it says they didn't have wives because they were guilty of fornicating. This is talking about Hophni and Phinehas. So before I read that last line in chapter 4, I want to have people get a better understanding of what is going on here. So this prophecy is saying that Hophni and Phinehas did not have wives. They were fornicating, not committing adultery. Okay? They didn't have wives because they were guilty of fornicating. This prophet is saying when Hophni and Phinehas were sleeping with the women, when they were coming to the temple, they were fornicating, not committing adultery. So I'm going to continue to read the chapter so we know at least one of them this is incorrect for, and that is going to be Phinehas. Now back in verse 18, it says that when the Benjamite mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward off of his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken and he died, for he was an old man and he was heavy. This is the NIV version. Some versions say he was fat. He had led Israel 40 years. So he was the priest for 40 years. He was the leader for 40 years. So he was around 58 years old when he became the leader over Israel. Probably already had his son, so they were raised up in that role. So they knew right from wrong. And he had 40 years to get them together and make sure that they did right. But he waited till the last minute and said something. Yeah, Yah was over him and his sons. But Yah let Eli reign for 40 years because he knew that he was going to raise up a prophet, a priest for himself. He knew that he was going to use Eli to raise up Samuel. And once more, I want to go back to this prophecy transcript to make sure that everybody understands that this information is incorrect and does not align with what the Bible says. You have incorrect information mixed in with correct information. And this is how the enemy will try to trip you up. It says they didn't have wives because they were guilty of fornicating. And then it goes down to say they were not married because that kind of thing, somebody would have caught them out immediately. I guess that was supposed to be called them out immediately. They were single men. See, that's another thing that's off. That's why I say it's always best to read the word for yourself, to seek Yah for yourself, no matter what. And then in the last paragraph, it says, there's no more line of Eli. If the father's houses are standing one day before the Lord, can you imagine Eli will be standing there with his two sons for judgment, and you will not see a line of modern people with cell phones. So what this prophet is trying to say is there is currently not a bloodline for Eli, and we don't know that for sure. But what we do know for sure is that the bloodline did not stop with Hophni and Phinehas. It actually went on for a long while after, and there is proof in the Bible. But we're just going to discuss these couple points for this specific presentation. Now back to chapter 4, verse 19, we find Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas. She was pregnant and near the time of her delivery. When she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she went into labor and gave birth, but was overcome by her labor pains. As she was dying, the woman attending her said, "Don't despair, you have given birth to a son." But she did not respond or pay any attention. She named the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel because of the capture of the ark of God and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband." Stay tuned for part 2. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy this video so more can be produced.